For section 10.6, what we're going to do is we're still going to do ellipses and hyperbolas, but this time the equations are not given in that standard form that we've learned. So if you take note of the example on the board, you've got 3x squared plus y squared plus 6x minus 6y equals -3. Now, one thing that you should be able to note is that this is going to be an ellipse, and that is because both the x and y terms are squared. It's a plus between them. They're both positive, but notice that the coefficients are different. So that flow chart that I gave you last week, if you go through your questions, this is going to take you to ellipse. So what we're going to talk about today is completing the square to put this in standard form. Now, I can't remember if we've talked about this in this class or maybe you did in Algebra 1. Either way, we're going to do it now. You say, what does completing the square mean? Well, it means what we're going to do is we're going to create perfect square trinomials. Perfect square trinomials are trinomials that can be factored into two equal factors. So like if you had x plus 2, x plus 2, we want to get something that factors like that. So what we're going to do first is you're going to group together your x terms and you're going to group together your y terms and put any constants on the other side. So what we would do here is we would group together the 3x squared plus 6x, and then we're going to group together with a plus sign in the middle because it's positive, the y squared minus 6y term, and leave the -3 on the right side. Now here's the problem with the x's. We cannot complete the square until the coefficient to x squared is 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide out a 3. Now that's going to leave us with x squared plus 2x. We're going to leave a blank because that's where we're going to complete the square. And then we have plus y squared minus 6y. We're going to leave a blank. And then over here where you have equals -3, we're going to put 2 blanks. And that's because if we're going to add something on the left side, we have to also add that on the right side to keep the equation the same. Now here's the way that we complete the square. To find what goes in this blank right here, you're going to do half of b and you're going to square it. Now the b value for the x's, that's this 2 right here. So if we take half of 2, that's 1. When you square 1, you get 1. Now what's tricky on this is that the value here, it's not really a 1. Really, this whole thing is multiplied times 3. Now we're not actually going to physically write it as distributing the 3, but we need to think of it as what happens when you distribute 3. So when you distribute 3 times 1 would be 3. So really, there's a value of 3 on this left side, which means we have to add 3 to the right side. Now for the y terms, we're going to complete the square also. We're going to do half of b, and we're going to square it. Now for the y terms, the b value is a -6. Half of -6 is -3, and -3 squared is a +9. Now notice that there is nothing in the front here to distribute, so this value of 9 is what we add to the right side. Now, to keep going and simplifying, you've got a 3 out front. If I had said factor x squared plus 2x plus 1, that would factor to x plus 1, which is the same as x plus 1 squared. For the y trinomial, you've got y squared minus 6y plus 9. If I had said factor this, it would factor to y minus 3, which is the same thing as y minus 3 squared. Over here on the right side, those 3's are going to cancel, leaving this to equal 9. Now we're getting closer to that standard form, but what we have to be careful of is we want our equation to equal 1. The way that you make this 9 turn into a 1 is you divide everything by 9. So we're going to put everything over 9. When we do that on this first equation, the 3 goes into 9 3 times. So you've got x plus 1 squared over 3 plus y minus 3 squared over 9 equals 1. And now that is in the standard form for the ellipse that we talked about back in section 10.4. And so from here, you could go through and you could find your center is -1, +3. We would know that y is the major axis and x is the minor axis, and then we could go through and find everything that we need to find from there. Now I'm going to show you one where it's a hyperbola so that you can see how to complete the square from there. So give me a second to get all that erased. Okay. So let's say we start with x squared minus 4y squared minus 2x minus 8y equals 7. So again, from here, you should know that this is going to be a hyperbola based on the flow chart that I gave you. Notice that both the x and y terms are squared, but notice that one of them is positive and then one of them is negative. So because of that minus sign right there, that's what makes this a hyperbola. Now we're still going to complete the square the same way we just did on that last example. So your first step is you want to group your x's together. So you have x squared minus 2x. Then you're going to group your y's together, -4y squared minus 8y. And then you have equals 7. Now on the x term, you have a coefficient of 1, so we're okay there. So we're going to leave that x squared minus 2x, and we're going to put a blank. Now on this next one, for the y, what we have to do is we have to make this a 1, so we're going to factor out a -4. Now remember, factoring is like dividing. So when you divide out a -4, you get y squared plus 2y, because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. We put a blank, equals 7, and we have 2 blanks out here to the right as well. So now this is where we complete the square. So remember, to complete the square, you take half of b and you square it. For the x's, b is -2. So half of -2 is -1. -1 squared is 1. Since there's nothing out front, then this 1 is what we add to the right side. For the y's, we're also going to take half of b and square it. This time the b value is 2. So half of 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. But again, this is where we have to be careful. This is not really a value of 1, because really this is -4 times 1, which is -4. And that's what goes out here to the right side. So you just have to be careful when you have that coefficient in front of the trinomial. So now, if I had said to factor this x trinomial, it would have factored that x minus 1, which is x minus 1 squared. We have -4, and if we factored this y trinomial, it would factor to y plus 1, or y plus 1 squared. Over here to the right, when we add 7 plus 1, that's 8, minus 4 is 4. And again, we're really close to that standard form. But what we want to do is we want to divide everything by 4. Now on the first term, when you divide by 4, it's just going to remain x minus 1 squared over 4. On the second one, those 4's technically they cancel, but they divide to 1. And I'm going to leave it as that denominator of 1, simply because I want to show you what that means. Now that you have it in this standard form, you could find that the center of your hyperbola would be 1, -1. It's going to open horizontally because the x term is first, or the x term is positive. But here's why I left the 1 here. I want to make sure you understand. In the hyperbola, the 4 would have been your a squared, so a is 2. The 1 would be your b squared, so b is 1. And I say that because if you didn't write the 1, then you may go back and think, well, what's the b value? The b value is that 1, because technically that's the denominator, even though we usually don't write a 1 in the denominator. Okay, I'm going to do one more completing the square. I'm going to do one more out of the book. Actually, all of these have been out of the book. But I'm going to try to just do one more for you so that you have another example, and you can always go back and rewatch these videos, rewatch these examples. so that as you have questions, you can kind of go through it all at the same time. Let's say that you've got 9x squared plus 16y squared plus 18x minus 64y equals 71. Now, what you can do is as you group your x's and you group your y's, if you go ahead and notice in front of the x squared you have a 9, in front of the y squared you have a 16. We're gonna have to factor out the 9 and we're gonna have to factor out the 16. If you can do that in one step, that's fine. Otherwise, do it in 2 steps like I'm gonna do here. So if you group your x's, you have 9x squared plus 18x. Group your y's, you have 16y squared minus 64y. And then we have our 71. So that's the grouping. Now we're going to factor. So if we factor out a 9, we have x squared plus 2x, and we leave a blank. We're factoring out a positive 16, which leaves us with y squared minus 4y. We put a blank. Equals 71, and then our 2 blanks. So to complete the square, we need to finish this trinomial. So we take half of b and we square it. Our b value is 2. So half of 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. But remember, it's not really a 1. It's really 9 times 1, which is 9. So we're going to add 9. For the y term, we're going to take, again, half of b and we're going to square it. The b value here is negative 4. So half of negative 4 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is 4. It's not really a 4. 16 times 4 is 64. So we're going to add 64. Now when we do that and we factor, for the x's we have 9. And if you factor your trinomial, you'd have x plus 1 squared plus 16. And when you factor your y's, you'd have y minus 2 squared. Equals, when you add 71, 9, and 64, that should add to 144. So from here, remember, we want to make this 1, so we're going to divide everything by 144. And when you take these fractions and you reduce them, on this first one, when you take the 9 and divide that into 144, 9 goes into 144 16 times. So you're left with x plus 1 squared over 16. 16 goes into 144 9 times. So you have plus y minus 2 squared over 9 equals 1. So what we've ended up with is we've got the plus in the middle. This is an ellipse. Our center would be negative 1, 2. It would be horizontal because 16 is the bigger denominator. It's under the x, so that means 16 is your a squared. 9 is your b squared, and you would go on and finish from there.